This podcast is a conversation by Julie Benetti and Susan Barbaro and is a production of VI Alliance, copyright 2019. And this chart-busting hit, Alone Leave Me, courtesy of New Threads, is available everywhere.
Hi, this is Julie, and I'm here with Susan, and we are continuing with our fifth podcast in the Neville Goddard series that we're doing on his book, The Power of Awareness. And we're somewhere in chapter 12 on. We're looking at subjective control. And these little in-between chapters are interesting to me because they kind of piggyback on what he previously talked about, assumption. People always say, you assume stuff, that's bad. Yet, when we assume for ourselves, it's very beneficial. And you don't think of it that way, yet, we are to focus our attention more on the inside and make that our subjective rather than what's going on out there.
Well, it's interesting because when you say that assume, that joke of, what you do when you assume is you make an ass of you and me, yet it's actually perfect because it gives a great example of exactly what happens with assumption, is that what you assume is what you act upon, how you feel, and where you move with it is based on your assumption. And they're taking it to the point that what you assume your response with is how you respond to something. It's a perfect example of the power of assumption.
Well, when you're including outside and you're not making the assumption of your desire and the follow-through of it and attaining what you desire going forward for yourself, and you're more based in what's going on outside.
The point that I'm making is your assumption guides your actions. Because when you say you make an ass of you and me, it's because you're assuming something and then you're acting upon it.
Right. And my focus is that usually when people assume things and you're saying you make an ass out of you and me, you just said you and me. That's not what the assumption should be. The assumption should be based in an assumption for yourself that's more powerful than that kind of assume.
So
that was my focus.
All I was saying is that everything you will do will be based on your assumptions.
Right.
The point is that what you assume is how you're going to act. If I assume you're just looking to argue with me, then I'm going to get argumentative. If I assume you're trying to propel me to see something more, I'm going to act a certain way.
Right. And we, approach things in two different ways, because I think it's more powerful when you say, it's already ingrained in you about assumption, but it's not bad for you to assume for yourself. That's hugely powerful.
Okay.
And in this instance where, he's saying, the subjective part is making your focus on your internal from the inside out rather than looking out there on outside conditions that you can't control and you can't change.
So sometimes I think, you read this in a lot of other books and stuff, and sometimes to me it almost becomes rhetoric. And when I listen to it in a different way, sometimes it hits me differently. And that's why when I hear something, I try to hear it differently. I'm trying to say, how can I understand this in a new way? And so if we go into acceptance, he talks again about, you have a belief, your imagination, and the more that you accept it, you move into the space of it being accepted, then, it's more powerful. And I'm just going to quote, because this, to me, is, I think, where a lot of people, including myself, stumble. He says, at the end of these periods or moments of absorption, you speed from these imaginative states where you have not been physically to where you were physically an instant ago. In these periods, the imagined state is so real that when you return to the objective world, you find that it is not the same as the imagined state. It is an actual shock. And I think that's what occurs, for me at least, that it hits you. You're working with your power of assumption and you're working with your imagination, and then it's like you wake up and you look out and you say, ugh. And I think this is really the power, but it's also the challenge for most of us. Because this is when you go from what you just said, the subjective assumption, into the external assumption.
I agree with the power in it. I think it's fascinating because we're obviously kind of approaching this from two different ends, which we usually do with stuff, because I find this stuff in this middle cluster here of the book is fine-tuning your internal. And it's really a focus on yourself, as we're going through the next few chapters. And where in this chapter itself on acceptance, I mean, it's amazing how much you accept every day. And you can take that externally, you accept the weather, you accept things that occur, you accept, yet acceptance is the key for yourself to move forward in this, power of awareness that he's sharing. And accepting, is a natural...
Disagree.
Accepting is a natural activity.
Yeah, but the problem that I feel is that, yes, I understand what we accept is important, but if we're trying to change and move into accepting what your imagination, what you're creating, that's, I think, the hard part of this. Even he says, after this, the shock reverses your time sense. By this is meant that instead of your experience resulting from your past, it now becomes the result of being in imagination where you have not yet been physically. And it says this moves you across a bridge of incident to the physical realization of your imagined state. When I look at this, I go to the philosophical and I can understand it. And then for me, I always say, okay, how do I work with this here? I always bring it to, how do I make this work for me in a better way? Because I want to do what he's saying.
When we go a couple of chapters ahead, I think he addresses the how. And
yep.
I'm not arguing your point. I'm meeting you in the middle, yet I'm not personalizing it out there. I'm just overwhelmed with how much he just pulls it. All the energy is pulling you inside. And so to have an external subjective response is irrelevant because it's really just, in the inside. And so you want me to ground it a little bit. And the way I'll ground it is yesterday I was working on some of our writing materials and I was in the space of energy of the two, an alien project I was working on and on another project that I was working that's related to a book, the Endra book. And I was in that space of that energy, and I was just there, completely in acceptance, completely in assumption, completely in nothing out there except wherever I was in that space, timeless. And so then, I started to get hungry, and the physical started, and it was kind of like, okay, I can wait. I kind of pushed it aside. Yet, the external, I'm talking about my physical body, but the external that comes out of that is when you go and you got to go get something to eat, then you completely take yourself out of that space. And yet there's a real bridge, that bridge that he's talking about of your acceptance in those timeless periods. It's overwhelmingly powerful.
But see, so you made the point. You say you go and then you get hungry and then you have to go and get something to eat and it takes you out of that space. And we're different people. Everybody's different. And you know me, I go so long, I have to get up and I'll do the dishes or I'll go and I'll make something. That physical movement, it does not take me out of the space. It actually, I think, somehow readjusts my physical to align better with the space that I was in. So my shock, which is what I'm talking about, is lessened.
So I'd like to clarify the quote-unquote taking you out of the space is, I continue because I know I've done this often, in my writing experiences. I continue in the material when I'm getting something to eat. So I'm accessing what he's talking about in the, focused attention from the inside out. Something could happen outside, but that's not where my attention goes. I still carry that. So,
but you said
attention.
that when it takes you out of the space when you stop to.
Well, I want to clarify that that's a space of it takes you out of the space because no, I'm not sitting in front of the computer and I'm not writing. Yet, how do you carry that with you? That's the how you're asking, and he's addressing that.
I know, and that's what I'm trying to make a point of because it's.
Well, you said that's a how. I want to know how.
Well, that's what I meant is I don't want to. I'm saying that he's addressing the how, and so I'm trying to take what he's saying and I'm trying to, as what I always call, making it cellular. And I'm more of a visual learner. I try to take a practical approach to it. Then I get it better. It can become a part of who I am.
I'm not really sharing what I need to do or don't do. I'm kind of looking, and you are, which is cool.
That's what
I'm not
do.
sharing what I need to do or don't do. So there's no comparison that you can make.
Right.
What I'm sharing is just the power of the concepts that he's sharing. And yeah, it is more energetic from that standpoint. Yet I don't know how else to say that. You focus your attention from the inside out, and there's really nothing you can change out there. I mean, and that's the subjective control.
Well, actually, that's the only way to change everything out there.
There's nothing you can change out there, being out there. I'm talking very staccato, because when you look at the chapter headings, sometimes they can throw you into a, wow, this is what does he mean by subjective control? What does he mean by acceptance? Because you already have definitions for these.
Well, what's interesting is moving along into working with the how and going from the inside, as he talks about it being effortless. The less is more, the least action. All the work is within you. There's no work outside other than what's within you and how you see everything.
Right, and he makes a hearty stab here that it's all based in mere assumption.
So one thing that I wanted to point out, and we kind of went over it a little bit, but when he talks about, again, going from the present state to feeling of your wish fulfilled, he says it's not a gap. There's a continuity between the so-called real and unreal. To cross from one state to the other, you simply extend your feelers, trust your touch, and enter fully into the spirit of what you are doing. And when I read that, all I got was the Kabbalion. He's saying the exact same thing of the Kabbalion, that, in polarity, there's two extremes, love and hate, but they're both the same, hot and cold. They're both the same. There's just varying degrees. In this section, it refers to what we did in the Kabbalion. And, we do go into much more in the Kabbalion podcast about how do you go from one to the other. And he said it beautifully. You extend your feelers, trust your touch. And it's like going from one extreme to the other.
I mean, just the huge vibration that I get out of this, and I don't disagree with anything you said, yet there's even a more succinct power to it, because he's saying, okay, how do you do it? Okay, just what you said. You extend your feelers, you trust your touch, you enter fully into the spirit of what you're doing. And it's funny because you can do all that, and it's still not a how for you. You can do all that, and it still doesn't occur for you. So I think that's the element of
what do you
fascination.
Mean? What do you mean?
Can do that.
Wait a minute, you can do it and it still doesn't work for you. What do you mean by that?
Because you keep saying, even you. No. I'm not picking it. You even keep saying how it's going to be a how. So he says, you want a how? Here's a how. Yet the underlying simplicity of it, you just have to accept. You just have to accept.
So that works for you all the time. You can just accept. I think that's
I'm
the
not
challenge.
talking about me. I'm talking about this. I was talking about writing before. Right. But he's saying you just have to accept. That is so amazing. It's so simple. So you're looking for a how. You don't have to look for a how.
Well, that's when he goes into the effortless way. So the how is, when he says, is that you move into the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And so when you're sitting in a situation and your wish on the external doesn't appear fulfilled, you use your imagination. I'm always like, what's another way to support that? And it's just extend the feeling from love to hate. It's simple, hot to cold. It's all the same. I just think that's a beautiful way of bringing it forward.
That's why I started by saying, we accept tons of stuff all day long. We don't even realize that we're accepting. We don't even realize what that activity means. And we accept tons of stuff. Oh, the store you called isn't picking up the phone. Okay, we accept it. And we accept, and that doesn't mean you feel bad about it or anything, or what, they're all out of something, or okay, or it's going to rain later. Okay, I mean, we accept a lot of stuff. And we don't ask how we accept that stuff. Yet when we go into ourselves, in our inside, in our whole natural power, he's saying that's completely effortless. He's just saying it's accepting that. So why can't we translate our acceptance for everything else to really, there's the subjective view, to not take it outside, but take it inside and just accept. And it's along the lines of people's, saying forgiveness, as a concept. You can say, oh yeah, sure, I forgive you, I'm going to fit. But you really have to go into that space of forgiveness. And I think that's a huge part of the quote-unquote how that doesn't exist as a how, because it's a natural element of us. And even just, trying to, wrap your mind around the power of assuming for yourself. You do this activity out there when you look out and you make assumptions that most often aren't healthy for you, but you won't assume for yourself, which could be the healthiest thing of all. I mean, it's pretty amazing. These are just simple yet very complex, I don't want to say feelings, but concepts.
Well, it's like I always say saying no. Everyone says, oh, just say no. It's like saying no and really understanding what you mean when you say no is very difficult. It's easy to say no, but then you still do it. When you say no and you stand by with conviction, that's a whole different... a lot of the stuff talks about assumptions determine your experience. And the truth is that how it really does. Do you look through, do you see everything through rose-colored glasses, or is everything doom and gloom?
Right.
And it doesn't matter what's going on in your life. If you see everything as doom and gloom, then I don't care what's going on. The greatest thing, you could have a great job, great family, tons of money, everybody loves you, and you're still going to be doom and gloom. And so your assumption is what you choose for yourself. And it's, literally, it was funny. Today I was driving and I just kept thinking, everyone I saw, hey, have a good day. Have a good day. And it's like, why would I do that? Because my assumption is that everybody is going to be good to me and I'm going to be happy. This is my life. And, I'm not, Miss Rose-colored glasses all the time. But today it was like interesting. Like, that's all I'm going to do. And I don't care. And believe it or not, as the day went on, things went better. And I think... And it's interesting because the effort isn't in fighting things. The effort doesn't come in changing out there and making things work. It really comes from within yourself. But once again, I always look at that as really the most difficult thing to do, is really changing yourself to that extent which you believe it.
And yet all I'm kind of trying to say is, if you look functionally, that you utilize all these skills out there. I mean, these are things you should be using for yourself. And so you already know how to use them. So it's not even a question of how. It's not like you got to go buy a book, invest in a plan. I mean, assumptions guide your conscious and your subconscious. And they just dictate the events and dramas that occur. So why wouldn't you use that for yourself? I mean, that's just beautiful. I mean, it's right there.
Right. Of course.
It's right there.
Well, I think we want to. I think anyone listening to the podcast and reading this wants to do that for themselves. And here's, the last part of the last page of The Effortless Way. He says, perpetual construction of future states without the consciousness of already being them. That is, picturing your desire without actually assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled is the fallacy and mirage of mankind. It is simply futile daydreaming. And that is, I think, the most important piece of this, is moving from just a daydream into the feeling of the wish fulfilled. I think that's a huge thing. People daydream and they think that they're in that space. And what he's really trying to bring to light, and all these things, these little cues that he gets, is because if you just go into this, oh, look at this and this is great and blah, 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 but you don't go into the feeling and you don't move into acceptance, then you're just daydreaming. And I think that's really an important part to get from this.
And I think the cherry on top is the personal impotence chapter. Because, the element of self-surrender, I mean, again, there's a meaning to that. And it's funny because he brings us back into, creation is all completed. It's finished. It's done. So it's impossible to force anything into being, into occurring. And so, that really X's out the how for everybody, doesn't it? There you go. Throw that out with the trash. And so, and the example he gives is that, there's already the law of magnetism. You can, bring together stuff to utilize the law, and you can put stuff together and have it conform to the law, yet it already exists. So it's not like you can create that law. And so not having to even contemplate the how is complete self-surrender to just accepting and utilizing, the power of your assumptions for yourself. That's kind of cool. I mean, that's all it takes. Wow, okay.
So the other thing is that, I'm not disagreeing that everything is done. So there's nothing to do except move into acceptance. I completely agree with you. And I think if it were that easy as you seem to make it out to be, I think we'd all be living in a different world. But we're not. And I think that, he talks about the crown of the mysteries, talks about Mary of the Immaculate Conception, and that every man is Mary of the Immaculate Conception. And it's a matter of, through your persistence, the assumption becomes actual fact. And it's the persistence of acceptance. And I think, we all face the challenge of maintaining that. I think in theory it sounds wonderful. And I think, living in this world today, it really takes, an act of faith. It's sometimes a little bit more to stay in that.
Yet isn't that part of an assumption as well? I mean, wouldn't that fold right into the subjective control? I mean, that's part of an assumption as well. I mean, I'm not saying this is way easy to do and this is just, a piece of cake. And I'm not, expressing my own personal opinion at all. I'm actually in awe at I get the vibration of how this all wraps around, and it's pretty powerful. I get the sensation of, wow, it is pretty easy, yet I'm not saying it's pretty easy. And the only way I can relate it to is that we already do all of this stuff. We're already experts at doing all this stuff. So why aren't we doing it for ourselves? And that's a simple way to say it without going on and on. Why aren't we internally supporting ourselves and moving with this ourselves and self-surrendering to the power that we already have, irregardless of whatever assumptions we have about out there? That's not helping us. That's all we can change is ourselves, and we know that.
Okay, so I think it's interesting what you said, and I would question why, if we already know this, why aren't we doing it? And I'm not saying you have the answer. It's just a question
that's a really interesting question, because then it takes you, that's a really cool, it could take you into sci-fi, it could take you into anything, because why would we distract ourselves so well? Why are we so brilliant at not taking all this stuff and utilizing it for ourselves? That's a great question. Does that uphold the whole quote-unquote matrix that'll exist around? Will everything fall apart if we all get this awareness? I mean, that's a cool question you ask. And, sure, there are so many possibilities of answers, and I'm not trying to answer it. I'm just trying to say that is a really cool question, because, again, gee, isn't that funny? It takes us out of the how do we do this into the why are we doing this to ourselves? When, according to Neville Goddard, I mean, he doesn't say, hey, this is easy, but he's just presenting this, and it all fits together. And, my relation...
There are some people that think that it is relatively easy. Certain people grow up with different mindsets, and maybe they look at this and this is second nature to them. So I'm making an assumption that people have a hard time with it. I just think if you look out into the world, because of course I always bring it to the world, and I see what's going on and the discussions and the dilemmas that people are faced with and what people say. I look at this and I think, why is it hard? Why did I make it hard for myself? And when I look at some of the things he talks about with acceptance and everything, and I go into it, it's not to decipher it. I'm sort of asking that question of myself. And I'm projecting it, and I think it's a question we can all ask, and maybe not. Maybe there's people that don't need to ask it. But I look and I think, why am I struggling with it? Or, and I'm not struggling that much with it. I've been very fortunate, and it's not about me.
One part that you said is you look out into the world, and I think these chapters in the middle here are like looking into a mirror, into a mirror, into a mirror, right. Into a mirror, because... we started at subjective control, and if you're going to take this and look out into the world, you just set yourself up. It's like you can't.
Well, it's my world. What I see out here is not going to always be what you see. I see things differently, very differently than you do, Julie. We know that.
I know that. Yet, the expression of what we're...
So this is where we got into the discussion before, because he says it later on, and I'd have to look to see where it was, where he says, what you thought of before is now what's in your world in front of you today. So whatever my thoughts were previous is what I'm looking and seeing in the world. What I see in the world is what I thought of yesterday or last week or last year. And that's what I see in the world. So when I look at the world Of course, I mean, I could describe it however I want, and you can describe it, and we're both right because we only see what we see. So if I'm seeing something, why have I projected in the past what I'm seeing today?
And I think it completely relates to this middle section because, it's, I want to be careful in the terms I say because I'm not saying this, but I'm just trying to converse it. And sometimes it's hard to converse it in the vocabulary that you're using, yet focusing your attention from the inside out, not on the outside, is the huge actuality here.
And that's where assumption comes in, whether you're going to look and see it with rose-colored glasses or through doom and gloom. And of course, I'm going to use
But again, that's still you're motioning. People in the podcast can't see. You're motioning outward. That's not even the environment he's in here. He's saying taking all of this and it's just inward. It's that space that I was talking about of writing and carrying that space with you. It's that space of making that even a bigger space all around, and it's not the attention to what's out there. And so it's very hard to converse about because the words I'm using, are getting interpreted and redefined. And that's why I say it's just, and again, I'm not saying it's simple, but I'm saying it's simply, focusing your attention from the inside out and using your assumptions inside
to see what you see outside. I agree with everything you said.
And accepting.
So wait a minute. So why do I see what I see outside?
Because he says in the effortless way, because creation is finished, what you desire already exists. It is excluded from view because you can see only the contents of your consciousness. It is the function of an assumption to call back the excluded view and restore full vision. It is not the world, but your assumptions that change. And that's a really good question. Why aren't I seeing? And so I think, that's a whole mouthful to absorb. And I think when you take all this cluster of chapters that really go together well, it's just, if you can take an activity, make it an activity of self-surrender, of, that transforms you from the how into the why. And again, the awareness that you have these abilities and these faculties, so do them for yourself. Whatever that means. That's just a horribly simplified way to say, parts of this really great energy in this book. I don't know how else to say it because there's a vibration to it. And when you're reading it and you're involved in this conversation, there's a real potency. And he's, that's the chapter we're ending on in this podcast is the personal impotence. But there's a real potency to this. That's just that, the law exists. Everything is created, so you can't force anything. You can't force anything to occur out there.
But
so
all you can do is force yourself to see it. That's
force yourself to see inside.
And that's what I'm talking about on the do. It's how do you work with your internal, because that is, I agree with you, that is where all the answers lie. And so if the how is really not go out and learn how to do something, it can be that, that will help but it's really about how do I get myself to see that which I haven't brought into my own view, because everything is done. So how do I bring that into my space? You do it by accepting, and that's the leap of faith. And sometimes you just, it's like someone holding your hand when you're making a leap of faith, saying it will work out.
Yet you're making a leap of faith to the power of yourself, which is pretty freaking cool. And yielding to that wish fulfilled and that desire and, the assurance of that and getting into that vibration and being consumed by it. I guess that's reckless abandonment.
And it's interesting because we agree, and what he's talking about is it's all internal. And you know what? This is going out on the limb, but it's like even why bullying is so bad now. It's because with social media, it's like you can always go back and see what someone said about you. Constantly, you relive it. That's a description of how I think our mind works. What is it we keep putting in front of us? And I think with social media, because it's right there, it's making it harder to do exactly what you said, just to go inside, create your own assumption, your own mindset, and make that, the main player of the game instead of worrying about what everybody else says. And I think the how is not any different than what you're saying. I just look at it and think, okay, so if I'm having a bad day or I get a phone call and, so it's another bill that comes in or whatever it is I want to do, whatever it is I'm dealing with, how do I help to bring myself into that space? And you're right, you don't go the outside, you go the internal. And I just think all this is just ways of doing it, and so I just keep trying to capitalize on it, like hitting it from different angles to try to make it work more for me, because it's all about me.
Well, it's all about me for everybody.
Right.
They're me.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the crux of
God, it was a joke!
Well, from subjective control all the way to personal impotence. There you go.
Thank you for listening to this production from EI Alliance. Check out our Amazon authors pages for books and podcasts. Find New Threads music and their latest album on iTunes, Spotify, and newthreads.us.